with that, I will entertain a motion for a due pass recommendation of Board Bill 129.
Moved.
It was first moved by the Alderwoman from the 11th, so we'll go with her. Does anyone second?
I believe the alderman from the 5th seconded.
Alderman from the 5th
I
seconded.
will call for previous roll.
And there's a call for previous roll from the Alderman from the 9th. Any discussion? Any objection to previous roll? Hearing none, we have adopted Board Bill number 129, or passed Board Bill 129 with a due pass recommendation. Thank you, Alderwoman. You are now recognized on Board Bill number 130.
Thank you. Board Bill 130 is a result of that same meeting. It is a request to put a speed hump on the 4200 block of Folsom, which again is near the school. We did recently put up some school zone signs, but again, we know that City of St. Louis drivers or whoever's driving through our streets don't always honor the signs. So we want to put a mechanism in to actually slow people down when they're driving.
Thank you so much. Any public comment or written comment on this bill, Madam Clerk?
We have none.
Okay, with that, we'll move to the committee for questions. Alderman Vollmer.
No questions.
Alderman Keys.
No questions.
Vice Chair Browning.
No questions.
Okay. Is this one, Alderman Saunier, that you didn't do as part of your regular process of requesting through the survey? It was more just because of the school being there?
Well, ironically, I did do this through my regular process, and when I first tried to move on it, a neighbor said that they didn't want it, and then at the neighborhood meeting, they changed their mind. So it did go through my regular process, but once I got feedback from the neighborhood, I put a pause on it, and so this is just to reinitiate what I kind of had already summoned from the request that I had gotten on that end.
Okay, well, thank you so much. No further questions from me. With that, I'll entertain, oh, please, if closed, if you'd like.
I would just ask for a due pass recommendation for Board Bill 130.
Thank you. With that, I'll entertain a motion for a due pass recommendation of Board Bill number 130.
So moved.
Second.
Previous roll.
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 5th, seconded by the Alderman from the 11th. There's been a call for previous roll from the Alderman from the 9th. Any objection to previous roll? Any discussion? Hearing none, we have passed Board Bill number 130 with the due pass recommendation. With that, we'll move on. Thank you, Alderman. Thank you for being here. And with that, we'll move on to Board Bill number 104, which is my board bill. Madam Clerk, if you can please pull up the presentation. And while she's pulling that up, I'll just give a little background for those watching at home. I will not be taking a vote today. This is more of an update presentation on the board bill and the work that has been going on for the last few weeks since the last time we heard it in committee. When we heard it in committee last, we were working through some working groups with the utilities, both small groups and in large groups and with the administration, and we've done a significant amount of work to get feedback on the bill now. So I just want to go through some of the feedback and likely changes that we should be seeing next week, just so everyone has this available to them, and that if there's any further comments before we actually have a committee substitute in front of us, we can address those things now. Thank you. Next slide, please. So just going through the bill piece by piece, the first section, the introduction, repeals the dig once policy. As we've talked about before, that's a policy that's not enforced in the city of St. Louis, although there are some really good things in it, like requiring restoration of the roads and some things that we are using pieces of in this policy, but this is a replacement policy for that. So that piece is not changing. That board bill is attached to the board bill if anyone still hasn't seen it. Next slide. So as I just said, the Dig Once ordinance is the current policy, but what's happening in practice is that there is a BPS permit that happens, an excavation permit from streets. None of the city has been divided into any quadrants to allow for only specific portions to be permitted at a time, as the Dig Once policy calls for. There had been in the past some collection of funds from the city of St. Louis from when the city of St. Louis was going out and adding the asphalt layer to the last few inches of utility work after it's been completed. That hasn't happened for a few years. And so this is in an effort to put more of the restoration on utility companies, as it has been other municipalities throughout the state and country. Next slide. So we went over section 1 already with the repeal, the Dig Once policy. Section 2 is the definitions that are included throughout the bill. There are some places that we're looking to improve those definitions. We have some new working definitions temporary repair, permanent repair. Embedding versus asphalt ramping is something that we're working through. And then also for the state statute, there's a state statute for definitions of emergency repair and for utility provider, which we're going to use to mirror the state language as to make our bill the clearest as possible for those going to be working with it. Next slide. Thank you. So section 3, there are some things in here that we're needing to work through. One of those things is defining the long-term maintenance plan and whether or not Board of Public Service or Streets will be handling the definition of that. The next slide, please. So the coordination also relies upon the board of, or for utility companies provide their long-term plan, and then as well as the city being able to provide both the 5 previous years of work and some sort of GIS map. One of the things that Spire suggested to is working with the Call Before You Dig kind of 811 service to make that information come to the city, and as the city act as a bit of a repository for that. So for that open trench piece, that the information can be pushed out to utility companies in an easy way so that there can be some coordination around when work does happen in the city of St. Louis. One of the other things, moving on to section 5 regarding the moratorium piece, we need to make sure that we're planning for development, new services, any mandated work pursuant to city, state, or federal legislation. There's a lot of that flags for that we need to think about when we make sure that that's planned for. One of the things that Olivet does really well is they have their city board. That's something that the streets department would like to be able to do but hasn't currently done, and that could be something that is helpful when we're thinking about what repair looks like and restoration looks like, with whether what kind of condition the road is in before the work happens. So that's something that we're considering in this moratorium section. Next slide, please. Okay. So we had already talked about the standards and expectations shared during discussions with city staff about what the expectations for utility work is. One of the things that was flagged for us is that for temporary repairs, or when there is work that needs to be done and how long utilities have and to restore the road, when there are emergency repairs, is that 6 weeks might not be workable, and then there's request for 8 weeks once from the issuance of the permit. Talking with streets, that doesn't seem to be an issue, so we expect to make that change. Section 6, responsibility of repair, no change is expected there. Again, this is language for many municipalities across the state. Next slide. The adoption of standards piece is where I think we need to do a lot more work, and we have some in continued follow-up meetings scheduled and have gotten just a ton of feedback from utility companies and from the city on this piece. One of the flags that we received is that the Missouri Department of Transportation standards often refer to highway standards and standards that may not make as much sense for the city of St. Louis's road standards. So many municipalities adopt St. Louis County standards and follow that piece. Of course, a lot of those municipalities are in St. Louis County, so it makes sense they'd follow the same standards. That's a topic for another day. So the other idea, of course, is just enforcing the standards that we already have within the city of St. Louis, which outlined on public service, while also adding in a few other pieces that talk more about what happens if a full lane of pavement is cut, or what sort of backfill material needs to be used, or what 20% of the block means. So that's some of the pieces that we're working to further define. We have some language for that, and we're still, again, working through making that final and seeking more input from that over the next coming days. One of the things that I think is really important for this piece of the bill is making sure that there is a clear expression of what those standards are. Again, the City of Olivet has a wonderful guide that goes through just step by step what the process looks like, what the work should look like after it's done, and that seems to be provided at the time that people are receiving their permits for doing work there. And also the permit the City of St. Louis currently uses for excavation isn't what the current practices are in the city of St. Louis when it comes to what is actually happening when utilities are doing work on our streets, the permit says to leave the road 2 inches below grade, and the city's supposed to come through and fill it, but that's not what is being said or I guess discussed either in person or in some other way where the utility is expected to bring it to grade with concrete, which is as we all know, causing issues in the roads with water getting in around those cracks and just the difference of materials that are on the roads and the different ways that that work is done has led to just a lot of deterioration of our roads. So that's something that I think if the city could present clearer and truer information when someone gets their permit and is expecting people to follow that permit, that will make a huge difference in the outcomes that we receive in the city of St. Louis. Of course, it is all about enforcement too. So we're talking a lot about what that will look like, and the clearer the guidelines and practices and expectations are, the easier it is for people who are out every day in the city of St. Louis to know if something's being done wrong or is a questionable process. I know for better or for worse, a lot of the reports in the city of St. Louis that we get about the conditions of our roads or alleys or other buildings in the roads are other buildings in the city are from constituents filing complaints through Citizen Service Bureau. So we want to make sure that people know what they should be expecting from the utility work that occurs. So that needs to be as clear as possible so even a lay person can understand what they should be when the work is done, so that even if the city of St. Louis is short inspectors, there are still opportunities for people to make sure that their voice is heard and they're getting the standards that they should expect. Next slide. Embedding of street plates has been a really contentious issue. A lot of utility companies, the way that's done generally is asphalt ramping around the street plate. That is something that is a bit easier in terms of not needing a special piece of equipment to cut out some of the pavement to actually embed the plate. So we're discussing what makes the most sense, again, from a getting the work done point of view to make sure that it's standardized, whether that is policy where asphalt ramps are acceptable in certain speed limits and embedding is needed for either longer term work that's being left for a longer amount of time or on higher miles per hour streets. So that's something that we're kind of working to finalize the last bit here in the bill. But it is something that I think is really important to the people of St. Louis to make sure that, when they're driving over utility work, biking over, walking over it, or on wheels over it in any way, that there is a gentle slope or an easy way to get over it so that there is not damage to whatever it is they're using that ramp. The section 9 regarding permitting standards and language, the goal here really is to create a process that is making sure that when permits are issued, we can make sure that they're followed. There are a lot of different municipalities that have higher deposits than the city of St. Louis does for work. There are some that have standards where they wait a certain amount of time, perhaps a year after the work is done, to hold on to the deposit. So if there's any complaints or issues or failed inspections or what have you between the time of the work being done and the time of the deposit being returned, that there is that amount of leverage to hold on to that amount of money to make sure that the repair is done well. So that's the one way piece that we think could improve in the city of St. Louis and improve within language of the bill. There's also this idea that what happens if you have continued bad actors or someone who's continuously doing not great restoration work, wanting to have some sort of debarment process. So that if there is a contractor or a utility worker, and we have to, or a utility provider, but we need to make sure we have that language right, that is consistently providing less than our adopted standards, that there's a process for warnings and then eventually not being able to do work in the city of St. Louis anymore. So wanting to make sure there's both there's a process for clear standards as well as what happens when these standards aren't followed and what should the expectation be when the standards are not followed. Next slide. So that is what we've been talking about in the bill over the last few weeks. There's been dozens of hours of communication on this with the administration and with the various utility providers. And I especially want to say thank you to Alderman Browning and his assistant Caitlin and my assistant Christian for being in almost all of those meetings. The utility companies have been wonderful about spending their time and using and others too, contractors and AGC and have been just great about meeting with us to make sure that we understand their concerns and what other cities are doing and what works well for them and what doesn't. So I think with this group effort, we should be able to get to a place that we're all at least okay with the process, and it's a lot clearer and better for our residents, which is what I care about most. So what to expect next? Committee substitute, the goal is to have this available by next week's hearing. In advance would be Monday, would be when we'd file that with the clerk. And then perfection would take place on December 6th if all goes as I hope it does. Of course, I will make sure that everyone on this committee is familiar with, I hope you feel familiar with the bill already, but make sure that you are comfortable with every change that we make before asking you to vote on it next week. But that is when, again, I tend to have a vote on the bill in committee. And then it would be second read that same week. There's no vote taken on the board at that time. Then it's the week of Thanksgiving. And then the next week is when it would be on the perfection calendar at the Board of Aldermen, which is the time that more amendments, if necessary, can take place. So still several more weeks of time for input. As I've stated since the beginning, though, the goal is to have this passed out by the end of the year. And our final meeting of the year is just the week after December 6th. So that's our little bit of a time crunch. But as with all bills I've sponsored so far here in the Board of Aldermen, I try to make sure they're really ready before I push to pass them. So I will continue to be as diligent as I can on that and make sure we have a good bill before I'm asking you to take a final vote. So that's the update. The goal of today, really, next slide. If you have any questions, maybe there's no next slide. I thought we had a question slide. Oh well. So if you have any questions, members of the committee, I'm happy to answer them. If you have any feedback or anything that you feel still needs to be changed in the bill, I would appreciate hearing it. There may also be people who've signed up from the public, so we can start. What's that? No? Okay, no one signed up to speak. Wonderful. We'll just go through the committee. Alderman Vollmer.
No. As far as getting this done, I'm experiencing it right now, of course, with our water department. A street recently paved a year and a half ago is now being torn up for 2 blocks, and every time it started off with just a quarter block, but every time they touch something, it keeps breaking. You know, we have a very, very old city. It's actually older than I am. So
It's a lot older.
So, you know, there are some things, you know, the emergency clause, the part of this, because you never know what's going to happen once you get underneath here. And the long-term thing would be to create a model where we can actually get into these and be proactive and not wait for things to break. As far as that's the water department, we have plenty of tunneling going on for utilities where they're putting cables and everything underground, which they're now the modern way of doing it works much better. So I believe that you know, many things in here are very good, especially the things about putting streets back the way they were. No offense, I don't see anyone Spire here, but Spire is the worst enemy of my streets. And I'm on record. Call me if you want. But it's there. You know, there've been, and I understand the problem. You know, again, an old city, but we have. I have locations where they've been camped out for a year and a half on people's streets,
Right.
Because it's just, you know, how we are. So I appreciate moving on this and getting some better structure into this, as many other municipalities have done. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. I have spoken with the water division about this and, you know, about what it means if they're doing work along an entire street or down the center of the street. And that's one of those full restoration of the pieces or the lane. And that's one of the pieces in the bill that we're trying to make sure stays in the bill, so that if there is a significant amount of work, especially on a new road like that, that it is returned to the same condition.
Because as soon as I saw this happening, I contacted the street department. Apparently, the water And they actually have been a little proactive. They actually have, a private contractor ready to do this. Pace, I believe, is the contractor who's under, for this particular one, to redo the whole street once it's done.
Great.
Because if you don't, and unfortunately, currently, it's up to us to do that. And putting it into a piece of legislation would make it much easier for all of us.
Right. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's definitely part of the goal. Alderwoman Keys.
No comments, thank you.
Thank you so much. Alderwoman Velasquez.
Just want to echo, I think, a lot of what said. Thank you for bringing this bill forward. I think that we obviously all agree that we need to have a bit more coordination. So looking forward to working the final committee substitute, or the committee substitute.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alderman. Vice Chair Browning.
Thank you. I know the amount of work that's gone into this bill, and it's been a lot, which tells you it's really well thought out. And I just want to repeat, thanking the utilities who have so thoroughly engaged with us and provided their honest feedback and their practical advice on how to make this possible. I think one thing a lot of people in the city might imagine is that the utilities cut up our streets with glee. But they don't. They drive these streets too. And in these conversations that we've had around this bill, I think what we see is an eagerness to solve this issue for everybody. And I really appreciate that, because I think at the end of the day, this is all of our city. And we all have to drive our roads, and we all care about the quality of them. So I think this is really big step when it comes to maintaining our streets and making sure that St. Louis City is getting the same deal, if not better, than the surrounding municipalities. So just want to say thank you to you, Alderwoman Schweitzer, for leading the way on this. And we really hope that this can be an effective policy that really makes a material difference out on our streets.
Thank you, Vice Chair Browning. That is all I have on the bill today. If there is anyone who would like to speak on it, please do sign up. But besides that, this is something that, again, has been just such a group effort, and I really appreciate the collaborative spirit that everyone had in getting this bill where it is today. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time on this, and I will be back next week. Stand up there and try to get your vote. So moving on. Resolutions for review.
We have none.
Committee discussions.
We have none.
Any written testimony.
We have none.
Any announcements?
We have none. What do we got?
This is when you all get to make your announcements, Alderman. No announcements, no jokes, nothing? Okay. Wonderful. Excused members, all members were present. Wonderful job, everyone. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 5th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 6th. There's been a call for previous roll, I believe, from the Alderwoman from the 6th. Yes. And any discussion? Any objections, previous roll? Hearing none, we are adjourned.